Democrats and Republicans will tell you the same thing. The American immigration system is in dire need of repair. There are more than 11.7 million undocumented immigrants in the country today. That's roughly equal to the populations of New York, Chicago, and Detroit combined. The modern immigration system began in 1891 with the Office of the Superintendent of Immigration, which sought to more strictly regulate who came into the country. The strictest standards applied to Asian immigrants. Virtually all Chinese immigrants were banned with their own special law, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. These laws are rooted in the eugenics movement, which treated all non-Anglo-Saxon Nordic races as inferior species. These laws were repealed in 1965 and replaced with a hemispheric quota system. Since then, the government's focused on border control, family reunification, and making sure the best and brightest could come to the US. In theory. The system is far from perfect, and finding a fix is a political nightmare. Even though more Americans support immigration reform than oppose it, legislation's been stymied by partisan gridlock in Congress. Democrats typically want to pass a comprehensive reform bill, while most Republicans prefer a step-by-step process that starts with border security. It looked like early 2014 would be the perfect time to find a solution. The midterm elections were far away, and there were no other political crises to handle. The political risk was low. Here's what Congress was saying.
This is an important issue in our country. It's been kicked around forever, and it needs to be dealt with.
There isn't anyone that I know in Washington State who thinks that the current law works.
It's a system that's broken and needs to be fixed.
We have a broken immigration system. It doesn't work for anybody, so it's very important that we fix our immigration system.
And here's what Congress actually did. Nothing. For the latest on immigration reform, check out Mashable's coverage, and don't forget to watch the other videos in our Mashable Explained series.
So the issue of who to let into this country and who not to let into this country is about as old as the country itself. It's an issue that America has debated since the early 19th century, and we've admitted people from nearly every single country since, but it hasn't really been an even admission process. So this line represents 200,000 legal immigrants to the U.S., and we're going to stack them up to see when they came to the U.S. and where they came from. So early on, most were European, largely Irish, German, and British, and there were also Chinese and Canadian immigrants. But in 1882, the U.S. passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned Chinese immigration for 10 years. That was extended and then made permanent, and it wasn't repealed for 61 years. The economic depression of the 1890s decreased European immigration and nearly stopped Canadian immigration entirely. But after the Depression, the demographics of immigrants changed, and there was a rise in Russian, Italian, Spanish, and Japanese immigrants. In 1917, the U.S. banned immigration from Asian countries entirely, except for the Philippines and Japan. In 1921, the U.S. capped immigration based on nationality. This severely limited the ability to immigrate to the U.S. for people not from the Western Hemisphere or a country with older roots in the U.S. Then the Great Depression happened. All immigration plummeted. Then World War II happened. The U.S. refused to increase immigration caps for 20,000 Jewish children fleeing Nazi rule. It also stopped naturalization proceedings for Italians, Germans, and Japanese. In 1952, the U.S. stopped excluding immigrants based on race, but more stringent quotas meant most slots were still for Western Europeans. In 1965, the quota system was entirely repealed. It allowed for a far more diverse group of immigrants, particularly from Central America and South America, but also Asia. In the 1970s and 80s, Asian immigrants arrived in huge numbers, largely from the Philippines, South Korea, India, and Hong Kong. The U.S. also evacuated 130,000 people from Vietnam after the war. In the 1990s, the U.S. increased immigration caps to 700,000 annually. The country began to invest in border security to discourage unauthorized migration, but in exchange allowed nearly 1.7 million Mexican immigrants in the 1990s. Immigration to the U.S. is now more diverse than ever. But with the rise of ISIS and the Syrian refugee crisis, prominent politicians are again talking about which immigrant groups to restrict.